Imagine a world where the maps are all filled in, every mountain peaked, and every deep ocean trench scanned by cold, unfeeling satellites. We tell ourselves that the age of discovery is over, that there are no more monsters hiding in the dark corners of our planet. But what if some of Earth's largest creatures didn't actually vanish into extinction, but simply learned the art of avoiding a noisy neighbor like us? Deep within the suffocating green canopy of the Amazon or the frozen silences of the Himalayas, stories persist of things that shouldn't exist. These are the cryptids, the hidden animals, creatures that occupy the thin, blurry line between biological reality and the wild frontiers of human folklore. For decades, sightings of giant ground sloths in Brazil or bipedal apes in the Pacific Northwest have ignited a primal spark in our collective imagination. We call them Bigfoot, the Yeti, or the Mapinguari, names that carry the weight of mystery and the faint, tantalizing scent of a lost world. To the skeptic, they are mere shadows and misidentified bears. To the believer, they are the last sentinels of a prehistoric era we misplaced. But why does this mystery persist in an age where we can track a smartphone across a continent or see a blade of grass from space? The answer lies in the sheer scale of our world, a place far more rugged and three-dimensional than a flat digital map suggests. Our planet still holds vast blind spots, wilderness areas so dense and unforgiving that they could swallow an entire civilization without leaving a trace. Consider the Megatherium, a giant ground sloth the size of an elephant that supposedly went extinct 10,000 years ago at the end of the Pleistocene. Paleontologists like Dr. David Oren have spent years investigating reports from Amazonian tribes who describe a creature identical to this long-dead titan. These witnesses describe a beast with reddish fur, a terrifying scream, and skin so tough it can deflect the sharpest of hunters' arrows. Could a population of Ice Age giants truly survive in the deepest pockets of the rainforest, hidden by the very trees they once fed upon? The idea isn't entirely baseless, as history has shown us that science is often surprised by the sudden reappearance of the dead. In 1938, a fish called the coelacanth was pulled from the ocean despite being thought extinct for 66 million years since the time of dinosaurs. This Lazarus taxon proved that if a creature is specialized enough and its habitat remains undisturbed, it can hide from us indefinitely. If a 4-foot fish can hide in the vastness of the sea, could a 10-foot ape hide in the vertical labyrinth of a mountain range? Today, we will look past the hoaxes and the grainy photos to ask a bigger question. What does science say about the hidden giants? To understand why we are so obsessed with these shadows, we have to look at the Gigantopithecus, the largest primate to ever walk the earth. Standing nearly 10 feet tall and weighing as much as a polar bear, this massive ape lived in the bamboo forests of Southeast Asia. Our ancestors likely encountered them, creating a deep-seated biological memory of a giant other that shared our world. While the fossil record suggests they died out 300,000 years ago, their existence provides a physical blueprint for the Yeti and Bigfoot legends. But if they are still out there, they would need more than just a hiding spot. They would need a viable breeding population. Ecology teaches us that a large mammal requires a massive amount of calories and a huge territory to sustain even a small group. For a creature like the Sasquatch, this means thousands of square miles of undisturbed forest, far from the reach of logging roads and suburbs. This is the population density paradox. A group large enough to avoid extinction should be large enough for us to stumble upon. Yet, the sightings continue, and in 1967, Roger Patterson and Robert Gimlin captured the most famous piece of evidence in history. The Patterson-Gimlin film shows a large, hairy figure walking with a heavy, fluid gait through the creek beds of Northern California. For over 50 years, experts in biomechanics and Hollywood special effects have debated whether it's a masterpiece of costume design or a miracle. Critics point to the awkward proportions, while proponents highlight the visible muscle ripples and the unique mid-foot break in its step. Anthropologists like Dr. Jeff Meldrum have analyzed thousands of footprint casts, looking for signs of dermal ridges and organic movement. He argues that many of these tracks show a complex internal foot structure that would be nearly impossible for a hoaxer to fake. But in the world of science, physical traces like hair samples and footprints are often inconclusive or belong to known species. A massive 2014 study led by Professor Brian Sykes of Oxford University used DNA sequencing to test dozens of Yeti hair samples. The results were sobering. The hairs belonged to cows, horses, raccoons, and in 2 cases, an ancient, unidentified species of polar bear. This discovery was fascinating. It suggested that while the monster might be a myth, a real, unknown animal was still lurking in the Arctic. It reminds us that nature doesn't always give us the mystery we want, but it often gives us a mystery we didn't expect. So, if the DNA doesn't point to a monster, why do so many credible witnesses swear they've seen something that defies explanation? To solve the riddle of the hidden giants, we have to look at the psychology of the human eye and how it fails us in the wilderness. Our brains are finely tuned pattern-matching machines, evolved over millions of years to detect predators in the dappled light of the forest. This phenomenon, known as pareidolia, causes us to see faces in clouds, figures in shadows, and monsters in the gnarled roots of an old tree. When a hiker is tired, dehydrated, or isolated, their brain might fill in the blanks of a blurry shape with the image of a lurking beast. But the mystery isn't just in our heads, it's also in the vast vertical geography of the Pacific Northwest and the rugged Himalayas. Biologists point out that the Pacific Northwest contains over 200,000 square miles of forest, much of it nearly impassable for humans. If a large primate were to live there, it would likely be a relict population, a small group left behind as their habitat shrank over eons. This brings us to the island biogeography theory. Can a small, isolated group survive for thousands of years without inbreeding themselves to death? Genetic diversity is the fuel of survival, and without new blood, a population of Bigfoots would eventually succumb to genetic defects and extinction. Unless, of course, these creatures are far more mobile than we think, moving across vast wildlife corridors that we haven't mapped yet. In the 1950s, the Yeti captured the world's attention when mountaineer Eric Shipton photographed a massive, humanoid footprint in the snow. The Shipton footprint was remarkably clear, showing a wide foot with a distinct thumb-like toe unlike any known animal in the region. This sparked a decade of Yeti fever, with expeditions funded by millionaires and even the US government searching the high altitudes. Sir Edmund Hillary, the first man to summit Everest, led one of these hunts, only to conclude that the scalps were made of goatskin. Yet, the local Sherpa people maintain that there are 3 distinct types of Yeti, each with its own behavior and habitat. To the Sherpas, the Yeti isn't a cryptid to be hunted for fame. It is a spiritual entity, a guardian of the sacred high places. This highlights a major clash in the story: the Western desire for a biological specimen versus the indigenous understanding of a living legend. When we look for Bigfoot with cameras and drones, we are searching for a physical body, but we might be missing the cultural soul. However, science doesn't give up easily, and a new tool has recently entered the hunt: environmental DNA, or eDNA. By simply sampling the water in a remote stream or the soil in a cave, scientists can detect the genetic fingerprints of every creature nearby. Environmental DNA is a game changer because it doesn't rely on a blurry photo, it relies on the microscopic debris of life itself. Every time a creature breathes, drinks, or sheds skin, it leaves behind a genetic trail that modern sequencers can read like a book. In the Loch Ness of Scotland, scientists used eDNA to scan the entire lake, finding no prehistoric monsters, but an incredible amount of eel DNA. This suggests that many monsters are simply known animals reaching unusual sizes, or perhaps our eyes exaggerating a very long fish. But in the dense jungles of Vietnam and Laos, the story took a very different turn in the early 1990s with the discovery of the sao la. The sao la, a forest-dwelling bovine with long, straight horns, had been known to local tribes for centuries, but was completely unknown to science. It was the first large mammal discovered in 50 years, proving that even a creature the size of a deer can vanish in the green. If the saola could hide for so long, what about the rock apes that American soldiers reported seeing during the Vietnam War? Veterans described bipedal, reddish-brown primates that would throw stones at patrols, a behavior seen in many known great ape species. Primatologists suggest these could have been a large, unclassified species of macaque or gibbon, yet no specimen has ever been brought to a lab. This leads us to the physical evidence wall. In a world of 8 billion people, how is there not a single tooth, bone, or body? When a large animal dies in the wild, its remains are usually recycled by the ecosystem with terrifying speed. Scavengers like vultures and insects tear at the flesh, while acidic soil and humid weather dissolve the bones in a matter of months. In the rainforest, nature's cleanup crew is so efficient that finding the remains of even a common animal can be like finding a needle in a haystack. Some researchers argue that if cryptids are highly intelligent, they might even bury their dead or move to inaccessible caves to die alone. This introduces the intelligence factor. We aren't just looking for an animal, we might be looking for a cousin who knows how to hide. If a species developed a culture of stealth survival, they would view our drones and cameras as existential threats to be avoided at all costs. This would explain why sightings often happen at the fringes of civilization, where the wild and the domestic briefly overlap. It's in these liminal spaces, the edge of a highway at midnight or a remote campsite, that the barrier between our world and theirs thins. But to move from maybe to definitely, we need more than stealth. We need to look at the footprints left in our own history. Ancient history is littered with accounts of creatures that look suspiciously like the cryptids we chase today, from the Enkidu of Mesopotamia to the Grendel of Beowulf. These stories aren't just fairy tales, they are often based on real-world encounters with relic species that survived the end of the last ice age. Anthropologists note that many indigenous cultures have specific, non-mythical names for these creatures, treating them as biological neighbors rather than gods. In Australia, the yowie is described by the Aboriginal people as a hairy, man-like beast that has inhabited the bush for thousands of years. Interestingly, the description of the yowie often matches the extinct Megatherium or other giant marsupials that once roamed the continent. If these stories are oral records of real animals, it suggests that human memory is a much more durable storage device than we give it credit for. Scientists call this traditional ecological knowledge, a deep understanding of the environment that often precedes Western scientific discovery by centuries. However, the lack of recent physical evidence brings us to the human encroachment paradox. As we expand, the hiding space for giants shrinks to zero. In the 21st century, the world is glowing with infrared sensors, acoustic monitors, and high-altitude thermal cameras. If a 10-foot ape were walking through the woods, it would emit a massive heat signature that would be visible to a passing satellite. The fact that we haven't caught one on a high-definition thermal scan suggests either they aren't there or they have a way to mask their thermal footprint. Some fringe theories suggest interdimensional travel or cloaking, but science prefers a more grounded explanation, the misidentification bias. A study of Bigfoot sightings in the US and Canada showed a direct correlation between the number of sightings and the local black bear population. When a bear stands on its hind legs to reach for food or investigate a sound, its silhouette is remarkably and terrifyingly human-like. Add a dash of low light, a pinch of adrenaline, and a teaspoon of expectation, and a common bear becomes a legendary monster. Yet, even if 99% of sightings are bears, that remaining 1% is what keeps the scientific spark alive in researchers like Dr. Jane Goodall. Goodall, the world's leading expert on chimpanzees, has famously stated that she is open-minded about the existence of an undiscovered large primate. She knows better than anyone that the great apes are masters of their environment, capable of complex social behaviors and profound secrecy. If they exist, they aren't monsters from a horror movie. They are cousins on the evolutionary tree, perhaps our closest living relatives. But to find them, we might have to stop looking for a beast and start looking for a reflection of ourselves. If these creatures are indeed a reflection of us, then our search for them reveals a deep existential loneliness in our own species. We are the only bipedal, high-intelligence primate left on the planet, a lonely branch on an evolutionary tree that used to be crowded. Just 50,000 years ago, we shared Earth with Neanderthals, Denisovans, and the tiny hobbits of Flores Island, known as Homo floresiensis. The hidden giants represent our subconscious desire to not be alone, to believe that the world is still vast enough to hold a peer. This is why, despite the lack of a body, the International Society of Cryptozoology and serious academics still debate these possibilities. In 2003, the discovery of Homo floresiensis in Indonesia shocked the world, a 3-foot-tall human relative that lived until quite recently. Local legends of the Ebu Gogo, small hairy people who stole food, turned out to be a hauntingly accurate description of a real species. If a miniature human could stay hidden in the caves of a small island, the case for a giant human in a vast continent grows stronger. But as we move into the future, the window for finding these creatures is closing due to the sixth mass extinction event. We are losing species at a rate 1,000 times higher than the natural background rate, often before we even know they existed. If Bigfoot or the Yeti are real, they are likely the most endangered animals on Earth, clinging to the last fragments of their world. The irony is that the very technology we use to find them, drones, roads, and satellites, is what destroys the isolation they need to survive. This creates a conservation dilemma. To prove they exist, we must find them, but finding them could lead to their immediate downfall. Imagine the chaos of a Bigfoot discovery site. Thousands of tourists, hunters, and media crews descending on a fragile, hidden ecosystem. Perhaps the kindest thing we can do for a hidden species is to never find them at all, leaving them their dignity and their silence. This brings us to the philosophy of the unknown. Is a world that is fully mapped and understood actually a world worth living in? We need the monsters to remind us that we aren't the masters of everything, that nature still holds secrets that can't be Googled. They serve as a biological keep-out sign, protecting the idea that some places should remain wild and untouched by human hands. Every grainy video and every unidentifiable footprint is a protest against the boredom of a perfectly charted and digitized planet. But before we conclude our journey into the dark woods, we must look at the final piece of the puzzle, the witness. Behind every legend, there is a human being who saw something that shook their understanding of the world to its core. These witnesses aren't always looking for attention. Many are pilots, biologists, and police officers who risk their reputations to speak. They describe a feeling of primal dread, a sudden silence in the forest where even the birds stop singing and the air grows heavy. Biologists call this infrasound, low-frequency sound waves that large animals like tigers use to paralyze their prey with fear. If a massive primate exists, it might use this invisible weapon to keep us away, a biological fence built of pure, subsonic vibration. This suggests that the mystery isn't just passive, it might be actively defending its right to remain unknown to the modern world. As we peer into the darkness of the lava tubes on the moon or the deep trenches of the sea, we are looking for the same thing. We are looking for a frontier that hasn't been conquered, a place where the rules of the city and the laboratory don't apply. Science is a light that we carry into the dark, but we must remember that the light itself changes what it touches. If we ever truly find Bigfoot, the monster will die, replaced by a subject to be measured, tagged, and placed in a database. The magic of the Yeti lies in its almost existence, the way it dances just outside the reach of our high-definition lenses. Perhaps the value of these hidden giants isn't in their physical reality, but in the questions they force us to ask about ourselves. Are we ready to share this planet with another intelligence? Could we protect a neighbor that doesn't want to be found? Our ancestors lived in a world full of shadows and giants, and in many ways, that world made us who we are today. It gave us our curiosity, our caution, and our need to gather around the fire to tell stories of the things in the night. Even if the forests are eventually cleared and the mountains mapped to the millimeter, the monster will likely just move elsewhere. It will move into the deep space of the stars or the microscopic inner space of our own DNA, waiting for us to catch up. So, the next time you are out in the wild and you feel a pair of eyes watching you from the thicket, don't reach for your phone. Just take a breath, acknowledge the mystery, and be glad that the world is still a little bit larger than we can imagine. Because as long as there is a shadow we can't explain, the age of discovery isn't over. It's just getting started.